traditionally for cars of the Korean auto industry. The paintwork is too soft and thin, which is why it quickly acquires scratches and chips. The front bumper, roof and hood edges, wheel arches, windshield pillars and seals are most susceptible to damage. After 5 to 7 years of use, the paint may begin to blister on the roof, pillars and rear door window rails. For Russian assembled cars, you should pay attention to the junction of the wing with the marker lights, because due to incorrectly set gap, over time, in these places, the paint is rubbed down to the metal. Things are also bad with the durability of chromium, especially for cars operated in megacities. It quickly becomes cloudy. At the moment, there are no significant complaints about corrosion resistance of the body. Despite this, it's not worth delaying the elimination of chips, since a red coating may appear in them. Among the weak point of the body equipment, it's necessary to highlight the poor wear resistance of the protective caps of the front optics. The original windshield is also considered fragile. On restyled copies, the rear lights are not tight enough, which leads to oxidation of the contacts of the board. Some of the LEDs stop working. Of the less significant troubles, it's worth mentioning the short service life of the door opening angle limiters, the trunk lock button and parking sensors. Power units. At the choice of the Kia Optima buyers, 3 power units were presented. Atmospheric gasoline force with a volume of 2.0 new G4ND, G4NC, G4NE and 2.4 liters Theta 2, G4KE, G4KJ and a 1.7 liter D4FD turbo diesel U2. There are also instances on the market brought from the USA with a 2.0 turbo G4KH engine and a hybrid installation which includes 2.0 G4NE and 2.4 G4KK gasoline units. The new series motors have gained a dubious reputation due to the tendency of the piston to scoring and progressive oil burn. The main cause of the disease is the use of thin piston rings, a microscopic hole between the grooves of the rings and overheating of the piston, after which thin cast iron liners can go elliptical. The catalyst also contributes to the appearance of scoring, which begins to crumble in domestic gasoline closer to 150,000 kilometers. And since the collector is located close to the cylinder block, ceramic dust is drawn into the engine. Another common element is the early stretching of the timing chain, which can start ringing at a range of 150 to 200,000 kilometers. Early enough, hydraulic compensators that are sensitive to the purity of the lubricant make themselves felt clatter. It's also worth highlighting the tendency of the throttle to cooking, constant oil leaks from under the valve cover, and the short life of the air conditioner bearing, pump, generator, clutch and engine mounts. On average, atmospheric engines take care of 250 to 300,000 kilometers. The Theta 2 series motors are considered even more problematic. There are frequent cases when after 50,000 the connecting rod bearings were lifted up and then turned, but as a rule there were no fundamental problems. The reason is weak liners, poor connecting rod design and low oil pump performance. A signal of an impending breakdown will be the appearance of a knock, with the elimination of which it's not worth delaying, since over time the chances of a broken connecting rod and damage to the cylinder block increase significantly. Restoring an internal combustion engine is expensive, since you have to pay $5,000 for a new crankshaft alone. If the connecting rod breaks through the block, the repair will cost from $3,000. After upgrading the engine in 2015, the disease was eliminated. Like the younger representatives of the line, these engines are prone to progressive oil consumption, which is often caused by untimely replacement of the catalyst. Timing consumables also require attention. Often a chain with a tensioner makes itself felt, and thermal valve clearances it is necessary to adjust every 90,000 kilometers. Of the minor troubles, one can distinguish a tendency to cooking of the internal combustion engine, a short service life of attachments, gaskets and oil seals. The turbo engine of the series installed on the Optima GT is more loaded with fuel, which is why it's more prone to overheating and scuffing. It's also necessary to monitor the condition of the oil supply line to the turbocharger, since the junction of the tube and the flexible insert often becomes a place for lubricant leakage. Diesel Kia Optima most often bother with breakdowns of fuel injection and injection pumps. At low mileage, the USR valve also makes itself felt, coking and freezing. In addition to the fuel equipment in the D4FD engine, the gas distribution mechanism chain is given up quite early. If the internal combustion engine is not warmed up, it stretches after 140,000 kilometers, and the turbine pressure sensor errors in the turbocharging appear. It's also worth highlighting the tendency to coke the intake manifold and the fuel filter in the tank, the unreliability of the valve cover gasket, and the progressive oil burner, which manifests itself closer to 200,000 kilometers. Another disadvantage is the rather low prevalence of internal combustion engines, which makes it difficult to find a good service and spare parts. The resource of the engine is about 350,000 kilometers. Transmission for Kia Optima, two types of boxes are available: 6-speed manual M6 SF3 and automatic A6 MF. There are few versions with a manual transmission on the market, but it's for the best since on pre-styled car the manual transmission could make itself felt up to 100,000 kilometers. Among the main disadvantages, there is a small margin of safety of the clutch master cylinder and release bearing. Early enough, the gearbox may begin to make a cracking sound caused by wear on the plastic third gear synchronizer blocking ring. Of the less significant shortcomings, one can single out the unreliability of the input shaft and drive oil seals. They let oil through. After restyling, the manufacturer made changes to the design of the manual transmission, after which the box became less likely to bother with breakdowns. But there are also complaints about the reliability of the machine. So, for example, an unsuccessful valve body was installed on a car of the first years of production, which could become unusable after the first 100,000 kilometers. Later, the box was modernized and the part began to serve at least 200,000 kilometers. In the event of a valve body malfunction, the oil pressure was significantly reduced, which accelerated the wear of clutches with the overdrive and underdrive discs. Another weak point of the A6MF machine is the 3 to 5R and 2 to 6 clutches. The disease typical of Hyundai/Kia production differentials has not bypassed. With intense slipping, it breaks the splines of the differential housing. If you operate the car in the slipper on the floor mode, the torque converter clutch wears out faster than expected. Breakage of the part leads to the appearance of vibrations and overheating of the hub, after which the seals and pump bushings become unusable. Another disadvantage is the short service life of the speed sensors and the solenoids loop, as well as the use of the plastic pallet, which can be easily damaged by driving off the asphalt onto a country road. Reliability of the suspension, steering and brakes of the Kia Optima. The Kia Optima uses an independent suspension with McPherson struts in front and a multi-link design in the rear. The chassis is quite comfortable, but at the same time the owners note the tendency of the car to roll and the small resource of some chassis consumables. So, for example, for cars manufactured before 2030, after 50,000 kilometers, wheel and thrust bearings needed to be replaced. The front shock absorbers do not last too long. Depending on the operating conditions, they need to be replaced at a distance of 60 to 120,000 kilometers. Stabilizer consumables, as a rule, nurse 70 to 90,000 kilometers. If the car was often loaded to the maximum after 100,000 kilometers, the rear spring will begin to sag. The remaining parts of the front suspension serve 100 to 150,000 kilometers, but multi-link consumables can last up to 200,000 kilometers. In steering, the Achilles heel is the electric power steering, which begins to pester with extraneous sounds in the first 100,000 kilometers. The elastic coupling of the amplifier wears out. Early enough, the cardan joint of the steering shaft makes itself felt. After 120,000 kilometers of run, the steering rack and tips begin to knock. On pre-styling copies, the amplifier electric motor often failed. Among the drawbacks of the brakes is the tendency of the original disc to warp, which causes a beating in the steering wheel during braking. If a problem occurs, it's better to immediately replace the damaged part with a high-quality analog and not to try to restore it. Salon and electrical equipment. Despite the status of Kia Optima, the quality of interior trim materials leaves much to be desired. There are also complaints about the wear resistance of materials, especially for restyled cars. The steering wheel sheath is most quickly rubbed off. The plastic of the front panel and door cards is overgrown with scratches. The leatherette with which the seats are covered is not very successful either. It becomes covered with cracks over time. No difference in quality of soundproofing. In winter, plastic decorative elements and a panoramic roof can break the silence. They begin to creak unpleasantly. It's also worth noting the weak design of the metal frame of the front seats, which is why after 5 to 6 years of operation the seats can become loose. Among the shortcomings of the interior equipment, the owners of Kia Optima note the frequent freezes of the standard multimedia system and the short service life of the stove fan. Bearings begin to make noise after 5 to 6 years. Also, among the problem include elements of heating and electric front seats. Failures in the operation of onboard electronic are also possible. Most often malfunctions are caused by oxidations of contacts, but sometimes the equipment itself freezes. It's solved by restarting the car. When buying a car from your hands, be sure to check the operation of the rear view camera, since it's not tight enough and may not work correctly due to oxidation of the contacts. You can't call a problem-free Kia Optima, especially the versions of the first year of production. When choosing a car, it's better to give preference to copies released after 2013, since they eliminated most of the errors that made themselves felt on the pre-styling versions. If you are the owner of this car model, please describe the problems that you had to face during the operation of the car. Perhaps it's your review that will help leaders of our site when choosing a car.